Wang Taichong was a man of Zhejiang when he was still a small boy. He once lay sleeping on a bed at midday when the sky abruptly darkened, black clouds covered everything, and thunder broke over the house in violent crashes. At that moment, a fox larger than a cat darted in, thrust itself beneath his body, and clung there tightly, rolling and pressing against him without leaving. Only after some time, when the storm had passed and the sky cleared, did the fox run straight away. The boy was terribly frightened and told his mother everything, seeing that he had not been harmed. She was secretly glad and understood that the fox must have owed their family a debt of gratitude. So from then on, she often told the household to treat foxes kindly. More than 10 years later, Wang Taichong had a son named Yuanfeng. The boy was born hopelessly simple-minded, and by the age of 16, still could not distinguish male from female. So no family in the district was willing to marry a daughter to him. Wang Taichong and his wife were deeply troubled. One day, a woman arrived at the Wang home with a young girl and voluntarily offered to give her daughter in marriage to Yuanfeng. When Wang Taichong looked at the girl, he saw a gentle smile and a beauty that seemed almost celestial. Asked who they were. The woman said that her surname was Yu and that her daughter was named Xiao Cui and was 16 years old. The Wang family at once agreed to the match with delight. The woman left Xiao Cui behind, asked only that her daughter be carefully looked after, and then turned and walked out. She never came back again. Xiao Cui quickly learned how to read the moods of her father and mother-in-law, and both of them came to love her dearly. Yet she was playful by nature and knew no restraint. She would often sew a ball out of silk scraps and kick it about the courtyard, while Yuanfeng stumbled after her in pursuit until he was drenched in sweat and breathless. One day, Wang Taichong happened to be passing through the courtyard when the cloth ball suddenly flew up and struck him square in the face. Xiao Cui and the maid hurried to hide, but Yuanfeng simply picked the ball up and cheerfully presented it to his father. Wang Taichong flew into a rage, snatched up stones, and hurled them at his son until Yuanfeng collapsed on the ground in tears. When he went back and told his wife, she went to scold Xiao Cui, but Xiao Cui only lowered her head with a faint smile, scraped at the bed frame with her fingers, and offered not a single word in reply. As soon as the mistress withdrew, Xiao Cui went right back to jumping and playing, and used rouge and powder to smear Yuanfeng's face into a wild patchwork of colors until he looked like a ghost. When the mistress saw this, she trembled with anger and stood in the doorway, cursing Xiao Cui. Xiao Cui only leaned against the table and played with her sash, neither afraid nor answering a word. At last the mistress could think of nothing else to do and struck Yuanfeng with a stick instead, whereupon he burst into loud sobbing. Only then did Xiao Cui truly look alarmed. She knelt and begged for mercy. The mistress's anger softened, and she dropped the stick and left. Xiao Cui then drew Yuanfeng back to their room with a smile, dusted off his clothes, wiped his tears, gently rubbed the marks of the beating, and fed him dates and chestnuts until he quickly turned from tears back to laughter. Xiao Cui would often shut the gate and amuse herself by dressing Yuanfeng up in costume, sometimes as the king of Western Shu, and sometimes as a barbarian horseman from beyond the frontier. She herself would put on bright garments, bind her waist tightly, and dance with swaying grace before the bed curtains. At other times, she would tuck pheasant feathers into her hair and pluck the pipa until its ringing notes filled the whole room. Day after day, the chamber echoed with laughing and play until such commotion became the household habit. Because Wang Taichong pitied his foolish son, he could never bring himself to punish his daughter-in-law too harshly, and when he heard the noise in the courtyard, he usually let it pass. There lived in the same lane a censor named Wang, only a little more than a dozen houses away, and the two families had long been on hostile terms. At the time, the court's triennial review of officials was approaching, and because the censor feared Wang Taichong's authority over the inspectors of Hunan, he was determined to frame him on some invented charge. Wang Taichong knew of the scheme and worried about it day and night without finding any answer. One night, Wang Taichong had retired early when Xiao Cui put on a full set of great official robes and disguised herself as the current Grand Chancellor. She cut white silk into a thick beard, dressed two maids in blue as attendants, secretly led a horse from the stable, and went out muttering that she was going to pay a call on Wang, the inspecting censor. She rode straight to the censor's gate, deliberately lashed the maid beside her, and shouted in a loud, commanding voice, "I have come to pay my respects to Wang the inspector. Why should I stoop to visit some petty censor?" Having said this, she wheeled the horse around and returned home. The gate servant truly believed that the chancellor had come and ran in terror to inform Wang Taichong. He hurriedly straightened his clothes and went out to receive the visitor, only to discover that it was his daughter-in-law's prank. Trembling with rage, he told his wife that while their enemy was searching desperately for a pretext against him, this foolishness had gone and delivered one straight into his hands. The mistress rushed in to scold Xiao Cui, but Xiao Cui only gave a dull little laugh and said nothing. They could not bear to beat her, yet could not cast her out either, and so the old couple spent the whole night sighing in misery, unable to sleep. At that time, the real chancellor's authority was towering, and the robes and retinue Xiao Cui had imitated matched his style exactly. The censor repeatedly sent men to spy on the Wang household at night, but since they never saw the supposed chancellor leave, he began to suspect that Wang Taichong had indeed secretly joined himself to a powerful minister for treasonous ends. The next morning at court, the censor deliberately tested Wang Taichong by asking whether the chancellor had visited his residence the night before. Wang, thinking he was being mocked, answered evasively. This only deepened the censor's suspicions, so that for the time being, he put aside all thoughts of framing Wang and instead began making a show of courting his friendship. When Wang Taichong finally understood the reason, he rejoiced in secret and told his wife to warn Xiao Cui to curb her playful nature. Xiao Cui smilingly promised to do so, yet in everyday life changed nothing at all. A year later, the real chancellor was dismissed from office. Then someone sent a private letter to Wang Taichong, but the messenger delivered it by mistake into the censor's hands. Delighted, the censor first had a mutual acquaintance go and ask Wang to lend 10,000 taels of silver, but Wang refused outright, so the censor came in person to pay a visit, while Wang Taichong, flustered by the emergency, searched everywhere for the proper robe in which to receive him and could not find it. The censor sat waiting for a long time and grew annoyed. Just as he was about to rise and leave, he suddenly saw Yuanfeng shoved out from the inner doorway by Xiao Cui, dressed in an emperor's dragon robe and wearing crown. At first the censor was stunned, but then he laughed coldly, stepped forward, stripped the robe and crown from Yuanfeng, bundled them up, and carried them away. Wang Taichong rushed after him, but the man was already gone. When he learned what had happened, Wang's face turned deathly pale, and he cried aloud that this disastrous girl had doomed the whole family to extermination. The husband and wife seized sticks and rushed into the courtyard, but Xiao Cui had already barred her door and let them rage outside. Driven beyond endurance, Wang Taichong raised an axe and began chopping at the panels. From within, Xiao Cui answered calmly, and even with a smile, that he need not be angry, for if there were crimes worthy of execution and clan extermination, she alone would bear them, and would never implicate the two elders. Was he lifting the axe, she asked, because he wished to silence her forever? Only then did Wang Taichong stop. The censor returned to court and at once submitted a memorial accusing Wang Taichong of plotting rebellion, offering the dragon robe and crown as proof. The emperor was greatly alarmed and ordered the evidence examined, only to discover that the so-called crown was made from the pith of sorghum stalks, and that the dragon robe was nothing more than a patched bundle of old yellow cloth sewn together. The emperor then had Yuanfeng summoned to the hall. Seeing his foolish innocence and complete ignorance of the simplest court decorum, the emperor burst out laughing and rebuked the censor for false accusation. Later, the censor's own many crimes were investigated, and he was demoted and sent away in exile. After narrowly escaping the annihilation of his entire clan, Wang Taichong at last recognized Xiao Cui's brilliance and began to care for her in every way as if she were a priceless treasure. From then on, Wang Taichong regarded Xiao Cui as extraordinary, since her mother never returned. He suspected that she might not be human and had his wife question her. Xiao Cui only smiled and would not answer. When pressed again and again, she covered her mouth and laughed, saying that she was a daughter of the Jade Emperor. Before long, Wang Taichong was promoted to a capital office. After he passed 50, he often worried that he had no grandson. Xiao Cui had lived in the household for 3 years, yet she and Yuanfeng slept in separate beds every night and seemed never to have been intimate. Madame Wang had the extra bed carried away and told Yuanfeng to sleep with his wife. A few days later, Yuanfeng complained that Xiao Cui refused to return the borrowed bed, pressed her legs across his stomach until he could hardly breathe, and often pinched his thighs. The maids and old women all burst out laughing. One day, Xiao Cui was bathing indoors. Yuanfeng saw her and wanted to join her, but she smilingly stopped him and told him to wait. When she came out, she poured hot water into a large jar, loosened his clothing, and with the maids helped him into it. Yuanfeng felt stifled by the steam and shouted to get out. Xiao Cui refused and covered him with a quilt. After a short while there was no sound. When they opened it, he seemed to have stopped breathing. Xiao Cui remained calm and smiling, dragged him onto the bed, wiped it dry, and covered him again. Madame Wang rushed in crying and scolded her for killing her son. Xiao Cui only laughed and said that such a foolish son was better not had at all. Madame Wang grew even angrier, but amid the uproar a maid suddenly reported that the young master had groaned. Madame Wang stopped crying and felt him. His breathing was steady, and sweat poured from his whole body until the bedding was soaked. After the time it takes to eat a meal, the sweating stopped. Yuanfeng opened his eyes, looked around at everyone as if he did not know them, and said that when he recalled the past it all seemed like a dream. Madame Wang was astonished that his speech was no longer foolish and brought him to his father. Wang Taichong tested him repeatedly and found that he truly was no longer simple-minded. He rejoiced as if he had gained a treasure. That night, they returned to bed and set out betting to observe him secretly. Yuanfeng entered the room and sent all the maids away. At dawn, the bed was empty. From then on, his foolish madness never returned. And husband and wife lived in quiet harmony, inseparable as form and shadow. One night, the mistress and Xiao Cui slept in the same bed, and by chance the mistress saw a little fox lying at Xiao Cui's side. From that moment, a doubt began to grow in her heart. Not long after that, Xiao Cui accidentally broke a jade vase worth a fortune. The mistress, grieved for the treasure, sharply rebuked her. Wounded and indignant, Xiao Cui went out of the room and told Yuanfeng that after preserving their family through countless disasters, they had now shown her no mercy over a single vase. Then she spoke the truth. She was not human at all. Years earlier, when her mother had faced a thunder calamity, Wang Taichong had protected her. Moreover, Xiao Cui herself had been destined to share 5 years of earthly ties with Yuanfeng. And for that reason, she had come to repay the favor and bring that bond to completion. She had endured scoldings and humiliations all these years. And now that the 5 years were finished, she too must go. Having said this, she walked straight away. Yuanfeng chased after her with all his strength. But by then, there was no trace of her to be found. Yuanfeng returned to the empty room and wept almost to the point of death over Xiao Cui's remaining cosmetics and hairpins. He ceased to care for food or drink and grew thinner and more haggard by the day. Wang Taichong, greatly worried, quickly tried to arrange another marriage for him. But Yuanfeng's heart remained wholly with Xiao Cui, and he would accept no new wife. Instead, he asked a painter to make a careful portrait of her and burned incense before day and night. 2 years later, Yuanfeng went out on business and passed the family garden pavilion outside town, where he heard the sound of women laughing within. Dismounting, he peered across the wall and saw 2 young women playing in the pavilion, one dressed in green and the other in bright red. The red-clad one laughed and said that this girl should be driven out because she was unworthy to be another family's daughter-in-law. And the woman in green answered in a voice exactly like Xiao Cui's. Yuanfeng called out loudly. The woman in green turned and answered that she would not argue with him and that he should wait until his original wife came to reason with him. A moment later, the woman in red stepped out from the pavilion, and it was Xiao Cui herself. Overwhelmed with joy, Yuanfeng begged her to come down and see him. She sighed that after 2 years he had grown so thin he seemed little more than bones. He clasped both her hands and wept as he poured out the grief and longing of the years since she had gone. Xiao Cui replied that she too had thought of him constantly, but because of the harsh treatment once received from his mother, she had lacked the face to return through the Wang family's gate. Now, while wandering with her elder sister, she had happened to meet him by fate once again. Yuanfeng begged Xiao Cui to return home with him, but she refused absolutely and asked only to stay for a while in the pavilion within the garden. He agreed at once and sent a servant to notify his mother. The mistress hurried there in a carriage, opened the pavilion door, seized Xiao Cui's arm, and wept, blaming herself again and again for the harshness of former days and pleading that Xiao Cui come home and accompany her into old age. Xiao Cui firmly declined. The mistress feared the pavilion would be too lonely and wanted to send a whole group of serving women. But Xiao Cui accepted only the same 2 close maids from before, along with an old servant to watch the gate and refused everyone else. Yuanfeng told outsiders that he was withdrawing to recover his health and brought food and clothing into the garden every day, spending as much time with Xiao Cui as he could. Xiao Cui often urged Yuanfeng to take another wife, but he would never agree. Half a year passed, and he gradually noticed that her appearance was changing day by day until she scarcely seemed the same person she had once been. Puzzled, he listened as Xiao Cui asked whether she still resembled the woman of old. Yuanfeng replied that she did, yet not entirely. Xiao Cui then smiled and explained that through cultivation her bodily form had already altered and that she was no longer as she had once been. When his new wife entered the house, she said she would leave completely. Even then, Yuanfeng would not consent. Not long afterward, Wang Taichong settled another marriage arrangement, and the wedding day drew near. Xiao Cui told Yuanfeng in advance that she would leave on the following day. He tried every possible plea to make her stay, but she answered that marriages are governed by destiny, not by force, and that the woman about to enter his home would be the one meant to accompany him through the rest of his life. At dawn the next morning, Yuanfeng hurried into the garden, but the pavilion was already empty. All that remained was a single black strand of hair, once part of Xiao Cui's own tresses. Yuanfeng remained desolate until the new wife entered the household. Then he was struck with astonishment, for her face, manner, bearing, and temperament were exactly like Xiao Cui's of former days. Only then did he understand that Xiao Cui had already transformed another body in order to complete the rest of his life for him. The final commentary observes that such gratitude from a fox is exceedingly rare in all ages. Xiao Cui spent her days in riotous play and seemed at first to have no calculation at all. Yet whenever the Wang household stood on the edge of destruction, her wit surpassed that of ordinary humans. For 5 years, she endured harsh blame without resentment, withdrew only after her work was complete, and even fashioned a successor in her own likeness so that Yuanfeng would not face the rest of life alone. There is scarcely any deeper feeling in the world than this. And if human beings so often repay kindness with betrayal, how much more astonishing is the loyal heart of such an otherworldly creature.